Welcome to One Broken Mom, a podcast dedicated to raising awareness of mental health, parenting, and self-improvement. I am the host, Ameé Coney. One Broken Mom is not a family show. It is meant for adults and contains sometimes adult language. The topics I cover can be serious and unsettling to people. However, I do have a sense of humor laced with a little bit of a punk rock attitude. So if you're interested in real talks about real stuff by real people so that we can all get better together, well, then you're in the right place, and so welcome. All right, everyone, welcome back to One Broken Mom. I have to tell you, I am very, very excited about today's episode. I brought back to me Wendy Behary, and as many of you, I know many of you know, we wrapped up season 1 together talking about her book called Disarming the Narcissist, and also how to start to break the cycle of being in narcissistic relationships, whether they're in family dynamics, in work relationships, or in personal relationships. And I know it resonated with a lot of you because after that episode was published, I received many emails from listeners out there, and men and women alike. So I want to make sure that I clarify that. And there is a general, a frustration, I think is a really great word. And I know I felt this myself with, even though you kind of start to put some pieces together of how you want to be able to get yourself out of these bad patterns, still finding yourself kind of perpetually being drawn back into some of these relationships. And when it comes to romantic relationships, I know for me, there is this innate part of us as human beings to have somebody, for us, a person, a romantic connection with somebody. And so, being able to heal that part of our life and to find ourselves around a person that actually can help us reduce our own stress and add value to our life and beauty to our life certainly makes it so much easier when you're having to heal and deal with everything else that's related to, kind of unwinding the traumas of our past and our experiences. And so today's episode, we're actually going to focus on how you go back into dating after you've been in narcissistic relationships. And so for anybody that's listening, if this is your first episode here, I do recommend that you go back to the episode that Wendy and I did. It was called Ending the Cycle of Narcissistic Relationships. And also, fortunately, I have a whole show dedicated to this. You can probably find out a few more episodes that will help you kind of put together and untangle that big ball of yarn in your head, which is your childhood script. If, however, you've done that and you're like, okay, I've got my history, it's coming together, I'm still falling off the wagon, which, trust me, like I said, I've done this a few times, even myself, recently, as in the last few months, then this is probably a great episode to jump into. And so Wendy is here to talk to us about what are the next steps on your journey towards having these more secure relationships, and not just the ones with other people, but more importantly, the one with yourself. So Wendy, welcome back.
Thank you, Ameé. It's so good to be back with you.
So I know that, like I said, we've tackled the topic a lot of different ways. One of the last questions that I asked you in the last episode was, what kind of work should someone do on themselves first before they try to get into the business of managing relationships with narcissists? And because of wanting to talk about that point is, as we mentioned in that last episode, and as you bring up, a lot of internal work has to happen first in order to really heal that. We have to get past the understanding what our narcissist is, who he is or who she is, what their behaviors are, and then start to reflect internally. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought up that point, because I put a lot of emphasis on gaining knowledge. Understand as much as you can about narcissism and issues of narcissism, because it will liberate you to be not blaming yourself, doubting yourself, questioning yourself, but really understanding the makeup of this individual and how it plays a role in hurting, sabotaging, even abuse at some levels, when it's extreme, abusing you and abusing the relationship. So get that information, understand it well. The next step is understanding yourself, as you just mentioned. It's really get to know that deep inner core of you, what your inclinations tend to be, both for better and for worse, because we have sometimes that gut instinct that we fail to trust that will say, I'm saying yes, but I really want to say no. Why am I saying yes? Why am I saying yes? Why am I giving in? What am I apologizing for? I'm apologizing. Your gut is speaking loudly right up through your nervous system into your brain, and yet you're following a different path. Maybe one you learned as a little child, maybe one that was imposed upon you, maybe one that was modeled for you. But get to know, like, where did I get the idea that I have to forfeit my needs, or that I have to give in, or that I have to be the one who's always sorry for things when I haven't done anything wrong, or feel guilty when I have nothing to feel guilty or ashamed of. So you really want to get at the origins of that, get at the core, what we call the schemas, these embedded traits or beliefs or themes about your life, and put your narrative together as clearly as you can. So that's step one, because step two is going to be, how do you unlearn it? How do you undo it? How do you protect that sweet, precious little you who typically ends up, frankly, going on the date, Because whenever we're racked with a little anxiety, nervousness, even coming out of a narcissistic relationship, or a relationship with a narcissist, I should say, we may be more prone to feeling anxious and scared and concerned, reasonably so. But the problem with that, when it creeps up in the body, is what can also show up from memory is little you. And if little you is going out on the date, then chances become higher that you're going to respond to this potentially narcissistic individual, hopefully not. But if they are, you're going to start responding in those old familiar ways. Those old patterns come right on back.
And I'm glad you brought that up. For the listeners that haven't heard this before, I find that it's really helpful for me, especially as I'm talking to you and to everybody else, is as you're sitting here listening or watching this on video, be mindful of your body, because sometimes when we're talking about certain topics, we might start to feel the response first. We might, our heart might jump a little bit, or our chest might, or we might sweat or something. So for the listeners that are out there, as we're going through this and we're talking about these topics, be mindful of that, because that's what Wendy's talking about, is sometimes that's your first indication, right? That little you is popping up is because that in little rush of anxiety comes in. And if you're not used to doing that, I mean, I can tell you that it's one of my biggest helpful things that I've learned to do, is to hear myself and to feel, the response there. Now, because you talk about that, being able to know who shows up on the date, and I'm absolutely 100% correct. And sometimes I find that little you is the one who's also attracted, the one that gets all excited about certain people, that it's not really the adult version of you. It's the little you that's still going after the certain characters and qualities and characteristics. The whole, what's your type? Your type might still be the little person, right?
Oh, yeah. And narcissists are incredibly charming, most of them. So little you may get caught up in the fact that they do a really good job in courtship. So they're very good at wooing and charming and approving, and they're funny. They can be very bright. They'll entice you with lots of interesting, and I've got this and I've got that, and I can do this for you, and I could help you with that. And so they're seemingly heroic. And that can be very appealing to someone to almost anyone, frankly, but especially if you have a little you inside who was neglected, or who's been deprived of certain amounts of attention, or who was, kind of grew up feeling unsure of yourself, or had incidents that just led you to feel very alone or unimportant or insignificant. I mean, it just puts you at greater risk, even though, most of you have heard me say, and perhaps you've said this too, Ameé, that, no one is immune to being attracted to a narcissist for all the reasons I just mentioned. There's something about the attraction that's not all that puzzling, because the way they show up, at least in the overt sense. But if little you is sitting in the other chair looking at them, then you won't be mindfully aware of the fact that, they're not asking that many questions about me. And they're not really listening to my answers to those questions. They don't seem to, they kind of interview me like a journalist, but they don't really get caught up in what I'm feeling, what I'm saying. They don't seem to be really listening. Their eye contact seems to be off. There's a lot of interrupting when I start my sentence. You won't even be necessarily aware of that if you're sort of under the spell, or if you're in your most vulnerable state, in that childlike state, which is where we can all get thrown.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I recall too from one incident that I had where I, kind of found myself again, like, ooh, all the shiny bells and whistles, and go out and meet this person. And they asked questions, but they were very quick to, when I answered, tell me how it was wrong and how they could help me improve it, whatever it was. And so, there are some really skilled, people out there, which is why I think this episode is really going to be valuable from that regard, because as we go through, some of the questions, is identifying really what are some of the strong hallmarks of that personality type in the dating world and what you might hear and stuff. Now, I want to start off with, I talked with another woman who had been through in a narcissistic relationship, and she's actually a neuropsychologist, and she understands like the brain chemistries and things. And I want to first, when you're coming out of a narcissistic toxic relationship, how would you expect somebody to feel in those early days and maybe even months as they're extricating themselves out of that that abusive relationship? Because I know there's this weird pull back into it and doubt and just this I called it like glue. You have to kind of like disconnect all that glue. But if somebody, like some of my listeners that just wrote me that just broke up with somebody, how would you expect them to feel? And is that all normal?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a bit challenging because there's that word depends. It depends on how long has it been going on, how much of awakening has come in the decision to terminate. Did you terminate that relationship, or did the narcissist terminate it? They don't typically terminate relationships unless they have someone already waiting in the wings. But who terminated? And were you getting help? Do you have a big support system? So a lot depends, because if you're coming out of it after a lot of thoughtfulness and maybe some therapy and great friends and listening to Ameé's podcasts, and I mean, if you've come out of it feeling your strength, then you're going to be feeling on the greater side of relief. But even with relief comes, the mourning, the grief of just kind of looking at the time I've invested, and maybe some of those, who was I and why didn't I get there faster? And so you can end up living in the land of regret for a little while, or questioning yourself. Even if you've had, a fair amount of help and support. If you haven't had it, then you're more likely to be doubting yourself and really grieving in a way that can be more painstaking, because of there's a loss, there's a sense of investment with no real dividends. There's a feeling of, why does this happen to me? What's wrong with me? And some people come out of it and even can be quite scared and punitive with themselves. Like, I just need to give up relationships. I'm not fit for relationships. It must be something that I bring out, because clearly he or she, whoever the narcissist is, was incredible out there in the community. So it must be me. And these are all normal reactions, sad, but normal reactions to extricating yourself from this relationship. But mostly there's a fear of even thinking about getting into another relationship. I don't know if I trust myself, if I can really make that decision. I just don't trust my judgment.
Mm-hmm.
The fear of duplicating it.
Right. Now, I've seen the opposite, however, with that, where that fear, especially I think if you have abandonment, like in your trauma history, where I feel like I've witnessed, even with myself initially, before I kind of like pulled myself out of the fog, with I can feel better if I just go to the next relationship, just jump right in. And I've seen people do that, where they are just ready to just charge right out, hook up with somebody else right away, and get going. And, is that a recommended practice for some people? I mean, I have a gut answer for that, but you're the specialist
This
here.
is another really good question. And I'll say generally, no, it is not a good idea, because, having time to reflect, to breathe, to even just get comfortable with the discomfort for a little while. And as you probably did, to really dig down deep and figure out what's the motivational driver behind that, because it might be an old abandonment issue, or it might be an old issue of deprivation, or just feeling defective or broken or flawed. And doing some good work on that will help you kind of put yourself in that sturdier, poised position, to be choosing your next partner from a healthier platform. So for the most part, no, we don't want to just race into another relationship out of fear or out of any of those drivers that I just mentioned. But there are some cases where someone has endured the pain and suffering for so long, the loneliness for so long of not feeling loved, of not feeling connected, of not having a reciprocal, intimate relationship, that by the time they terminate the relationship and they've done their work, they're ready. They're kind of ready to start. I still say go slowly. Don't just latch on to the first person. Do your work, do your screening, do your scrutinizing. But, they may be more ready because they have done all the self-work prior to the ending of the relationship with the narcissist.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I know that there are people that definitely feel, that way, that they've put in a lot of effort, into understanding what's going on with themselves. And yeah, I mean, like I said, we are wired to want that. And sometimes it can be a very therapeutic and healing thing, is to be able to find that you can connect with another person again. I'm glad that you said take the time, because I do think that one of the things that can be really difficult for people, especially if their background is insecure and anxious, is patience is a very, very hard thing to come by and to manifest in ourselves. And because we are grabbing to try to get, a solution quickly. We've learned how to solve problems and to, dodge and weave as much as we can. And in relationships, it can be very hard to dial back and just say, let's just take a few breaths. There's no point in racing towards the, Facebook status update to relationship or whatever anybody wants to do. Anybody that is still prone to push forward really quickly, what might you say to that person in order to help them kind of develop that sense of patience and peace? I call it peace. I tell everybody I'm remarkably peaceful. I didn't set out to get it because I didn't know I needed it, but then once I attained it, I feel it everywhere. So I don't know how to quantify that, but from your standpoint as a therapist, what would you advise somebody there on how to start to achieve?
That's lovely, Ameé, and good for you, because I love that word peace. I mean, finding that internal peace, and that it is part of being in what we might think of as our healthiest adult mode. Being in a posture of a healthy adult, which means that we contain all the wonderfulness of a playful, happy child, and a curious human. And so for those who feel very antsy and really want to get back out there, what I say to them is use dating. If you're going to date, use dating as a discovery mission. Use it to learn about you. Don't use it to immediately think about connecting with someone in a really profound way. You might get lucky. You might, hit that $1 million lottery or something, but know that it's tedious, it's hard, but have a little fun with it. Be a little curious. Go out there and notice yourself. Going back to what I said earlier, when you're on the date, are you apt to share truths about yourself? Are you apt to say no when you want to say no? Are you likely to ask questions that that you're really dying to ask, but maybe the former you would have been more inhibited? Notice if you tend to agree with things that you don't really agree with. Ooh, there I am doing that again. That's interesting. Why am I doing that with this guy or with this woman? So use it as a chance to really take inventory on who you are and how you show up, and maybe how you shift when you're in a dating relationship or a dating stance. And that will be just such good data. You'll see patterns within yourself that you may need to work on for a while. So if you really have the itch to date, do it in this way. Do it for discovery of you, as opposed to really just trying to, grab another relationship as fast as you can.
Yeah, I love that. I did that unintentionally. Like, I didn't set out to do that when I decided, I had taken about a year off, and then walked into my therapist's office and said, okay, I'm going to try this dating thing again. Like, I feel like, I called it like I'm 90% there. So let's work on this 10%. And she gave me, a bunch of advice, and then when I went out and had some, mismatches happen, they weren't terrible or tragic, but I found myself naturally going back, because having gone through the therapeutic process and this inner working and this inner reflection, it came naturally to sit there and go, okay, let's think about what happened and why and all that. And I loved it, because you're right. As I was going through this process and dating, several people, every time I found something new, like, one of my best ones, I think, is when I went out with a gentleman who was much wealthier than I am. And I noticed inside of me feeling really insecure. Really nice guy, never did anything. He was very unassuming. Like, you wouldn't know, his wealth. And so there was nothing about his personality that was off-putting or anything like that. But just being in the presence of that, it bubbled up all these insecure feelings that I had about money disorders and, what my childhood experiences told me about wealth and money. And it set off this wonderful new opportunity for me to start to heal those parts, of my life and apply it to, day to day and business and stuff like that. He and I still talk. We decided that we just weren't a good romantic match for each other, which was fine. And it ended just fine. And we still, occasionally chat with each other and stuff, which I think is really good, is to be able to walk away from a relationship and not have it blow up behind you, but to actually go, let's be adults here. But you're absolutely right. So then I was like, okay, guess what? You've got this great opportunity. You are learning a little bit of something about yourself. Like, so if it ends and you end it or they end it, you just take away, some other good nugget, to move forward.
Yeah.
And it does change it. Like, I'm with you. Like, it'll be really awesome to meet somebody and have them be the person, but I don't set all those really high, grand expectations for that. And I think that was one of the things I had to change too, of where every relationship has got to be the relationship. Because we can be, speaking as somebody who has had these, again, toxic relationships, we can easily become codependent in them. And so that means that we start to put everything on a pedestal and we start to work really hard to make sure it all works, even if it's not working.
Yes.
And so I, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about then was, once the air has cleared in our life, and if a person is apt to replay those scripts over and over again, meaning that what's attractive to them could still be that little person inside of them being drawn to the shiny object of what the narcissist carries. Are there ever any non-negotiable red flags that you have to look for and avoid when choosing or deciding if somebody is a good emotional fit for you? I mean, I feel like there's obvious ones, like, have they murdered somebody? Do they steal all the time? But I do see people tending to just kind of like go, yeah, that's a red flag, but I can work with it. But I mean, in your opinion, like, are there the ones that you're just like, do not negotiate on these?
Yeah, very, very important. Something you said earlier that was still sticking in my head, and I loved this, because what you just described in your own example of the date and the guy who was not the right fit was you did your weeding very quickly. You didn't spend a lot of time. So it's another thing that I suggest to individuals who have been in, these toxic relationships, especially with narcissists, where, you go back into the dating world, do your weeding very quickly. And that takes us to this recent question about non-negotiables. I use that expression all the time, asking my clients, what are your fundamental non-negotiables? And take that back to your earliest memories of needs that just were never adequately met, messages you got that were so painful and excruciatingly distorted, but painful because they felt true at the time, especially if they're being told by caregivers who are important in your life. But if you're carrying around the message that, you should have to work harder than the average person because you just don't measure up, or in the end, if you don't really sacrifice yourself, you're going to be alone. So if you got messages like this, and there's so many others, of course, that we could come up with, you want to really get a sense of, what is it that I need? What were those needs that were never fulfilled? And that will help you to identify those fundamental non-negotiables, meaning the personal ones, as you said, not the axe murderer or the serial killer, but those. I really need to be with someone who has the capacity to be affectionate or to be present, to be a give and take person, because I have these strong tendencies, given what I've learned in life, for better and for worse, to be sometimes too giving, too self-sacrificing, allowing myself to become controlled or suffocated or subjugated in relationships. So my non-negotiable is someone who's just going to like glom on and manipulate. And I mean, not that anybody wants that, but certainly that would be a red flag, and especially a red flag if it's part of your life story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's easy to get caught up in the fantasy and the imagination that, you know, I'll just love him really well and it'll change. And, you know, I'll just be my best self and I could just lose that last 10 pounds and it's just going to be like amazing. Be careful with that thinking, because again, narcissists don't change because of any of those reasons. Mm-mm. They don't change unless they want to change. They have to change. They're feeling forced to change, and then they get good therapy to do that. But they don't change otherwise. So identifying what's absolutely not negotiable and really having that deep conversation with little you about that unmet need and how you've coped with that throughout your lifetime, because that'll give you many clues. If your coping style has been to subjugate and self-sacrifice as a means of covering up that otherwise feeling of being unlovable, this is beautiful for narcissists. They get to have their way, they get to be entitled, they get to walk all over you. And again, that's not your fault. It's no one's fault. It's just a reality. It's just a life experience that needs to be investigated so you can heal it. So you can literally heal it so that, again, you're going out on the date, you're meeting new people, you're sheltering the little you. You're literally tucking in your little self into a safe place in your imagination so you can stand up, raise your chin, you know, open your eyes and walk into that meeting, that date with your healthy adult intact, ready to be an advocate for yourself, ready to really take a look and see, is this going to violate those non-negotiables? No relationship is perfect, but there's small imperfections, compromises, and flexibility, and then there's non-negotiables.
Right. You, I have like two thoughts in my head, and so I want to continue this one here. While you were talking about that, I sat there and I thought, our non-negotiables, for clarification, really are with the deep work isn't that whether or not they have their college degree or whether or not they, have been married before, have kids or whatever it is. What I had discovered through the dating process was that a lot of what I thought were my negotiables changed. And that's a normal process. I believe is that you put your list, and we're prone to do this, unfortunately, because of online dating, right? Your online dating profile doesn't ask you what your emotional non-negotiable points are. You can put that in there if you're privy to them. But mostly it just asks you about how tall they are, blonde hair, blue eyes, college degree, blah, 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 blah. And so we get confused with that's the metric that we're measuring everybody by. And that's how we decide whether or not they're a good fit. But I will tell you that what I had discovered through the course of this, dating and starting to reconnect with people was one of my major non-negotiables, again, rooted in that little girl inside of me, which was transparency and communication. I am a very forgiving, flexible person. If you have a busy day ahead of you, and it's difficult for you or you're not addicted to your phone. That's another thing. When I send a text message out, I don't have a timer on it. I say this now. I used to, though. I used to have a timer, and I used to want to make sure that the answer was coming back timely. And if it didn't come back to me timely, then my brain went into death scenarios. He's cheating on me. He's, in an accident. He's whatever. That's that anxiousness, right? Where the lack of answer. But what I also did discover was that I had a pattern of having people in my life that when they didn't want to talk to me, they just shelved me. Put me on the shelf. We couldn't circle back to the topic. It was just, I'm just going to keep dismissing it. And I found that one of my non-negotiables was, I don't care if you're busy, just tell me that that's what's going on here. And then we get to come back to this topic discussion, whatever it may be. And let me know that you were thinking about it. You weren't able to get to it. And, and to me, that's like a healthier communication. It's something I feel like I give to people in return. But if I have somebody who is avoidant in their communication style, and when you start to share, they start to back away, then I know like there's no point moving forward. Like we're never going to have that deeply connected relationship that I want to have. Now, if somebody's working on it, like, hey, I apologize that I have difficulties being open, all that, I'm totally cool with that. That's that flexibility, right? I mean, we're all growing, we're all works in progress. But so for people listening, like to me, those are the non-negotiables. And like you said earlier about having like a process of, getting out, cutting sooner, I kind of established 2 dates. One date we all show up nervous and we all show up with our representative, and our best face. And then by the second date, it's kind of like you should be able to suss out a few things and decide whether or not you really want to, keep moving on with date 3 and 4. But if there's like definites out of there and by date 2, then it's just like no apologies and just kind of cut.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But if you're on date 5, and because, it's felt pretty good, and in date 5 or date 6, there's a new discovery. And just keeping with your theme there, which I love, that idea of that example of, not really responding in a timely way, but not owning it either, right? So that would be a red flag. The example you gave was, if let's say the guy in this case is saying, look, I'm working on this. I know I don't always show up so well. I'm not so good at being able to share my enthusiasm and, express myself emotionally, but I really want to, It's just been something that I've been working on in my own therapy. Okay, that's interesting. Probably not a narcissist. That's a good sign. But if you're not hearing any accountability, any responsibility, you're beginning to ask some questions, it's gnawing at you a little bit, or something's just changed dramatically between date 2, 3, and 4. It seems to be kind of going down the tubes a little bit. Most importantly, don't beat yourself up for that. Don't beat yourself up for that. It's okay. Move on. Just decide it's time. That's enough time. Even therapists will decide that it might take 3, 4, 5 assessments to decide whether or not this is going to go anywhere in a meaningful way. Because we do tend to hold back. Does tend sometimes to take time to see the true patterns really unfold. So again, using your word, we need to be a little patient with ourselves, but not so much so that it's going on for weeks and months. And, we end up just really losing precious time when we could be discovering someone else and discovering something else about ourselves as well. Narcissists, for example, what you're going to notice in that non-negotiable category, which I think is just non-negotiable for almost anyone, is that they can't be accountable. And you gave the example earlier, Ameé, that they may ask questions, but they're correcting your answers. It's as if there's a correct answer and an incorrect answer. And so you give your most honest answer because you are committed now to being honest and upfront, but then they fix it. Well, it's not quite like that. It's actually a little bit more like this. Or, they sort of dismiss it out of hand and one-up you with maybe something even better. Or they do that bait and switch thing that I write about in the book, where they're kind of baiting you like, are you okay? Or what's the matter? Or did I say something to upset you? And you share a little bit and they sort of roll their eyes or they chuckle like, you're silly for being upset about this. I mean, you can predict if you've been in a relationship with a narcissist that it's only going to be a matter of time before they're being critical and demeaning you for being upset with anything that they should have to say. Any of their wonderful words should be hurtful to you. How dare you? So these are some of the signs that you're going to see, and you want to watch for them early on, even test them, even provoke it a little bit so you can see what the response might look like. I often say to my clients, even if they don't agree with you, like if there's a lack of agreement, I'm using the data that comes out of John and Julie Gottman's beautiful work on healthy relationships, right? Years of research and beautiful work. And they will say this, they'll mention this one point in a healthy relationship where you may not enjoy all the same activities. You may not have all the same shared interests, but when you share something that's interesting to you, even if it's not to him, sitting across from you, can he be excited about your enthusiasm? can he seem to say, gee, you really love that, don't you? That's great. That's great. You light up when you talk about, that music. It's not my favorite, but boy, I love watching you talk about it because you just light up when you talk about it. Do they seem to be able to appreciate your interests, your enthusiasm, what matters to you, even if it's not the same for them? Because we're not going to have everything in common with anyone.
Yep.
So just good things to keep an eye on, because narcissists certainly can't bear it if you have your own opinion, ideas, or preferences. It's just unthinkable. It's as if you're assassinating their character because you're different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had that, and that was when I detected the next narcissist like fast and then cut it. But there were two incidences that, and red flags. I made sure that I didn't just take one red flag and pull the ripcord out of fear. Like you said, sometimes you're just like, you're on edge and you're worried that you're going to make the same mistake again.
Yes.
I think that I invested a little bit more time than I should have, but I'm grateful that I did, because then I was able to see more landmines and again, be able to take away from myself. But one of the things that was a trigger for me, and I felt it first in my body. That's why I mentioned at the beginning of the episode for people to feel how something makes you feel.
Yeah.
I had, texted, hey, I did this really amazing episode. I was talking about my show. Super excited. I think it's one of the best ones I've ever done. The response back was, yeah, I'm not sure it's really one of your best, but it's okay. And that's what I was like, are you fucking kidding me? But then, and that was my first response was like, ugh. And then it was like, wait a second, hold on. You know where this is going. Like, if here we are in the early days of courtship, or, him trying to, to get me interested in him, because I wasn't like that interested in him, but he was really trying hard. I know, like you just said, I know this only goes downhill. This only gets worse. Nothing is good enough. And everything that, I try to do, and that they shift you then into wanting to support and throw behind everything that they've got going on. Like, you have to constantly be idolizing their work.
Yes.
And they get you to do that by demeaning that what you're doing is really not as important as what they're doing. And therefore it's not worth your time and energy. You need to stop investing in yourself and start investing in me.
Exactly.
And I do think that is one of those early red flags, that to pick up on. And I like that you said, as time goes on, is there actually some key questions or some processing that you can kind of trickle out, in a dating process that helps tease out some of those toxic characteristics that all of those, narcissistic types of people actually do share, because there is a behavior pattern behind them. And if we don't know how to suss that out until we're totally wrapped into them, because we've gotten into the charm and the good, the charm, the good looks, the overblown love bombing and all that other stuff that gets us wrapped in, how can we be much more intentional? And I know this takes the spontaneity out for everybody that just is like, I just want to go with the flow. Well, if you've been in abusive and toxic relationships, and unfortunately, folks, going with the flow is no longer an option if you don't want to keep going in that path. So help me understand some other questions that you might be able to throw and kind of evaluate whether or not you've got a narcissist or, maybe somebody that's actually a little bit healthier and secure.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's use your example for one thing, and then we'll go on to a couple of other ideas. But what would a healthy response be? Clearly you're excited about your podcast. You're sharing, I think this is my favorite one, that I've ever done. And what would have been a healthy, caring, thoughtful, considerate response? Doesn't have to be loving because you're just meeting, but something that's thoughtful.
Right. Yeah. Well, with another person, that's amazing. What a great job. You're doing so well at it. That's what you expect.
You don't have to necessarily agree that it's their favorite one. They may have a different favorite one, but then mention the other favorite one. Really? Oh, wow. That's cool. I really love the one you did on blah, blah, blah. I thought that one was fantastic. I just think you really got your act together.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, something. Right. I mean, if they don't like your podcast at all, they don't like the work you do, then this is probably not a good fit because you're not going to get any respect, which is another sign. Right. But at least share your enthusiasm, mention the one that they may like even better. Great. That's great. You don't have to have the exact same opinion, but you were demeaned for sharing your opinion. Mm-hmm. So I often say the real golden nugget is empathy. The narcissists are so bad at this. I mean, most people are not great. It's empathy gets confused with sympathy and compassion, as I think we talked about before, but look for little strokes of empathy, meaning that there's something's connecting in a way that feels very resonant, as if you can start to see yourself reflected in the mind and the eyes and the words of the person sitting across from you. So it would be something like, well, that must have been hard. What was that like? Or, oh, you okay? You look a little sad when you said that. Or, well, yeah, of course you would be excited about that, given what you just said about, your daughter. Of course you would be excited about the fact that she was able to achieve that. Good for you. Right? They're connecting with you. It's not just, bullets on a screen. There's more elaboration. There's more fleshing out of the conversation. There's a sense that they're attuned to your experience, not just the words coming out of your mouth. Again, like as I said, a lot of people, especially men, who are just not socialized so much this way as women are not necessarily so good at this. But you'll get at least a better flavor of that from someone, a man or a woman, who is not narcissistic. The narcissist will have a lot of trouble with this. They can have a solution. They'll have a solution like, I know how to fix that, or I know how to make that better, or, we can improve on that, or I can help you with that. And that's enticing, but it's not empathy. That's not connecting with you. That's not attuning to your experience that you're having in the moment. And I always say it's like more than a thank you. It's when someone doesn't just say thank you, they say, thank you, that really meant a lot to me. I was so doubting that I would have anyone to support me through this process, and there you were. That was meaningful, right? That's a real thank you. It's really sharing something from yourself. So the question becomes, can they connect with your experience? Can they share their own? Can they be vulnerable? Do they show any vulnerability? And I don't mean bearing their soul and their whole, story of life and childhood, but just a little vulnerability, using words like, yeah, that was a little scary, or yeah, I was a little upset about that, or, I was giddy with joy. It was just vulnerability, realness. You sense a real person there, not someone who's just trying to prove themselves, or someone who's just trying to sell you something, right? Or win you over.
Yeah, absolutely. They, one of the other experiences that I've had too in term, and I have actually started to think about what is it that I want to share about myself and how do I measure their response back. And like I said, I know that takes the spontaneity out. I don't want to scare anybody that I've gone out with that you're getting interviewed, but I do actually kind of approach it as there's some particular questions that I want to put out there. And one of them is, my work is important to me. We go back to what's a non-negotiable. A non-negotiable is my hopes and dreams and my goals. Those are non-negotiable. And that means investing in myself. And that's something that I had to learn, that, that it is okay to be incredibly passionate about the things that I want to do and I want to keep continuing to do. And if somebody is, like you said, they don't have to, be a twin. And I think that's another mistake sometimes, that, a narcissistic trick is they love to fall into twinning. I don't say all of them. Again, I'm not the expert, but my experience has been is twinning is a powerful thing, that it makes us feel like we're connecting by showing everything we have in common with each other.
Yes.
So I don't expect that from anybody, that they get it. But like you said, I do want to know, like, you don't have to listen to all the episodes. It's not a requirement, but do you get how important it is to me? Do you understand that this is important for me to do, and that I'm going to, remain passionate about doing this type of stuff. And because I feel like I have that to give back to somebody else, if I understand and respect it in myself on how important it is. And I understand that other people can have those things for themselves, and that a good relationship is to support a person in their endeavors and dreams. So those questions do kind of come up in there of like, well, what are your aspirations? What do you like? And then to be able to see how they respond. And if they do actually give you their face lights up, right? And as they tell you their story about what they want, like that's what you're talking about, is that there's a human connection when you can see some emotion come out of them that's, engaging and connecting there.
But I love what you just said about put it out there. Definitely put it out there, what's important to you, and watch what happens. Don't be afraid to say, my kids matter. They are my top priority. I'm not sure how you feel about that, or, if it's the same for you, if they have children too, of course, but they are my top priority. So I put that right at the, and watch the reaction to that. Is it quick? Do they pause? Are they hesitant? Do they stumble? Do they frown? Are they smiling? Again, they don't have to feel exactly the same way you do. They may be in the middle of some conflict with their children that they're working through, but you want to know that they can respect and appreciate what's important to you, be it your work, your kids, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's a superficial thing. And I think that that's why it's patience is required, is to understand that their connection with you has got to be more than that superficial level. The understanding the difference between being complimentary of how you look, for example, all the time, versus being able to connect, like you said, at probably a much more intellectual and emotional level. Because we do get that little person inside of us, especially if we're feeling a little bit worn out from the abuse of the last relationship. Any compliment feels good, but compliments are not the same as really connecting, with what you are and supporting what you're doing. And I think that's probably where the wounded, of us out there at some point in time have fallen prey to, they're just, they're so flattering.
Yeah.
And it's
and sometimes that's a cover up, as I've talked about in other interviews on this very specific topic, which maybe someday you and I can get more into if your listeners are interested. But if you've been with a narcissist who has also the classic kind of cheating mentality, mm-hmm. whether it's addiction to pornography, it's addiction to prostitutes, it's addiction to sexual affairs with other people, whatever, chat rooms, whatever it might be, but they have this issue, we call it like an intimacy disorder. And it's this hypersexual mode that they do tend to have, which is another way that they can feel grand and majestic and wonderful and extraordinary. And it's another way that it's kind of their drug of choice. It's another way that they avoid intimacy and, the real give and take of an intimate relationship. If you've lived through, suffered through, endured that, and you're out of that, that's something you want to get out on the table right away. Your position on fidelity and loyalty. And, you can say, I've lived through this. I'm not going to live through it again. So just have to put that right out there, that that's who I am. And I have zero tolerance at this point. You need to know that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And yes, we probably could talk about that one. I'd be happy to, because that is exactly, the last relationship of having to go through with that. And I have to tell you that one of the weirdest things was to have a conversation with somebody that I felt completely trusting of them. And it was a weird sensation. And a part of that piece came from, I have no doubts this person is not who they say they are. And I have no doubts that they are going to attempt to try dating behind my back, or that they want to keep a bunch of people on the table at the same time. And the anxiety that goes with, are you good enough? Are you better than the other 4 women he's talking to? I mean, it's such a weird process to get out of that, that lane, of those people and into that. And then it was just like, oh my God. So it's relieving, but you're right. It's like being able to say that and just say, listen, this is my past. I haven't been that explicit. I'm happy to do that, because I felt like I'm trying to figure out ahead of time if this is the type of person that, will demand that very direct tone, or if I can figure it out. The same perpetrator, the one that was like, that's not your best episode and whatever, was also chronically texting and chatting with a bunch of other women. And I laughed. I was like, yeah, this is not going anywhere with me. Like, no. And in fact, he had sent me a text with the wrong woman's name in it. And I actually just shot it back and was just like, you got to be kidding me here. So, but you're the hypersexualized. Yeah. Right. So yeah, we can talk about that other one, because that is important. Now, I've seen this amongst other people, this perpetually green lighting someone because you want to see the good in them, and and forgiving red flags, or giving someone the benefit of the doubt. And it honestly, it does drive me crazy when I see a person able to, inside themselves, say, listen, I'm just a really forgiving and honest, and, you know, I like to trust everybody. And so, yeah, so they were doing all these things, but I don't want to, you know, I don't think they'll do it again. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Um, if a person just finds himself in that situation where they just want to, you know, trust everybody and go with everything, but yet still keep finding themselves again with the same type of a person, what kind of advice might you give that individual to start to reflect a little bit inside with them? Like, what would you say to them that I can't possibly figure out what to say to them when I see it?
So it's very hard because, first of all, it's such a lovely trait to be forgiving and
Totally.
someone who gives people a second chance and recognizes that there can be all kinds of variables that can explain bad behavior if it's a blip. But
Mm-hmm.
if it's a pattern of behavior, which is what you're going to see in narcissism, you're going to see patterns of behavior that are deeply entrenched. So you're going to be the one always forgiving, always giving the second chance, giving the benefit of the doubt, coming up with ways of describing, or, you know, as some call it, the super empaths, who are, you know, looking at the early childhood experience and seeing the suffering little boy underneath. And, you know, he's just needs a lot of attention because he never got the attention he needed. All he got was demands and pressure to be perfect. And if you're doing that, it's very thoughtful, but the consequences, the cost to self is so high. So what I'm often saying is test your hypothesis. So if you're going to give benefit of the doubt because you believe this is a forgivable, you know, blip in the wind, that's fine. But A, confront it, talk about it, test it, you know, set up another experiment that's going to give them a chance to come through and to come through again and to come through again. You want to see more of an enduring pattern of positive behaviors as opposed to this negative one that maybe was just a fluke.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a pattern that has a life, you know, lifespan attached to it, move on. Just, you're going to pay a price that you're not going to change it. You're not going to fix it. And all your caring and your benefit of the doubting in the world isn't going to make that go away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess part of the thing that I've seen with some other people is the still going to the same type of a man or woman who requires benefit of the doubt over and over and over again. So there's one thing when you're in with one individual and it's just their blip, but when you're, like, let's take a hard look here. Does everybody require the benefit of the doubt that you keep
Right.
dating with? Because that's something different, right? Like you're still not in tune with what your script really is. Because I do agree. I think it's beautiful to be open-minded, and I am that way. But I guess, again, I also don't feel like I'm going to keep picking projects from this point forward, in my life. Yeah.
And do you get it in return? I mean, are you given the benefit of the doubt?
Mm-hmm.
Are you given the opportunity to make a mistake or to have a slip? Because that's not usually the case when you're dealing with someone who's narcissistic. It's really a double standard. They're entitled to do whatever they want. You're not. Mm-hmm. And so you want to be very careful to be watching for that. If you're coming from, this goes back to where we started, if you're coming from your healthiest adult self, then you're knowing that you are fine and you are worthy and you are deserving of love and respect and reciprocity. That you would only give benefit of the doubt in the context of a very healthy relationship when there's a moment, a fluke, a mistake, a headache, something has come over your partner and they're not at their best self. But coming from your healthy adult mode, you are operating with the I'm fine, I'm worthy, I'm deserving, and deserving to be what? Respected, loved, cared for, thought of, shared, community in this relationship. Not this sort of monolithic, unilateral decision-making. So you have to really take a look at where am I operating from? Am I coming from that platform, or is this the little me who just has learned how, sweet, sweet, sweet little me, but gives in so much and pays such a high price and doesn't get his or her needs met.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now we're coming to the place where that I wanted to ask you, because this can be difficult, which is the breaking off with the narcissist. And I don't mean the long-term relationship. I mean, like, here we're in the dating pool and we've been exploring, and we did it again. We found ourselves like, okay, I'm back in a place where I've gone through this. I feel like I have done a little bit of testing with my questions. I've watched the responses. I have somebody here that is going to be an unhealthy relationship. Yes. What is the best way to break up with a narcissist? Because, in the early days, they are extremely manipulative and charming and relentless. I mean, that's the other thing, is if they want you badly, they don't give up very easily. And it can be easy to be swept back in with the apologies and the I will change and excuses or all the other blah, blah, blahs. So what's your advice for kind of armoring yourself and not, and getting out of that relationship, even before it becomes like a full-blown relationship?
I would say take all the wisdom that you've just spoken, Ameé, all that wisdom that what they might do, which is to now start hounding you, trying to prove themselves to you. If they really want it to work and they feel you drifting, or you've even said, this isn't going to work for me, this isn't the right fit. First of all, I don't think anyone has to be apologetic for ending a relationship that isn't working for them. You don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to be apologetic. If the other is saying, look, give me some feedback because, I'm out there in the dating world and I want to know what I'm doing that isn't working. And again, I would say you can share with them, well, I don't know that it won't work for anyone, but it certainly doesn't work for me. It's just not working for me. And so you can give them feedback if you feel like you want to share something with them, but don't defend yourself. Don't be apologetic for ending it. Just say, this isn't going to work for me. It's just not the right fit. Right? I'm just not feeling it in the way that I want to. And so, thanks for the time that we've spent, but I think I'm going to move on and I wish you the best. Done. Right? But if you're already suspicious because you've tried to maybe slip away even sooner and they keep coming back, use the preemptive strike. Please understand that this is not me playing hard to get. This is not an invitation to continue to keep contacting me. I'm really asking you to respect, my boundary at this point because I'd like to move on. And I don't do that with ill will. It's just what I need to do. Right? So you can even preempt anything you anticipate that might follow with a very clear line and a very clear limit. No, we're not going to talk maybe next week and give it another shot, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And boundary violations, like we talked about this in the last episode, when your experiences and your script and your schema is a story of having your boundaries repeatedly violated, like not even acknowledged that you have some degree of limits for your own self that can be honored or respected by, caregivers or people around you. You are used to, having your boundaries continually violated in personal relationships, and narcissists are boundary violators. They're used to always being able to kind of press through and ignore, the boundaries that you set out there. And so that is important. And so, saying we're done, I do know also from the experiences with narcissists is that the intensity, they love it. So if you start to get in that defensive mode, like Wendy says, don't do, it can only just be more fodder and bait for them to continue to try to convince you more, and it can go on and on and on and on, like forever. So keeping it clean, keeping it simple, keeping it done.
Yeah, it's not you, it's me. It's
right.
Forget the it's not you, it's me.
Right. Yeah. It's just me. We're done.
Right.
And I will put this out there too, depending on the intensity of it, sometimes we feel badly for blocking people. Don't feel badly for blocking people. If you have to block the text, block the Facebook page, the contact, whatever it is, because you just know that it just doesn't feel healthy to you. And you've got all those feels in you. Like I said, during this interview with you, Wendy, I did get some of those sensations crop up in my body and stuff. And so I don't know if anybody else listening kind of had the same experiences while they were going through this, but remember, that's your signal, that you've kind of touched on something to really think about and be reflective of. Yeah. So it is possible, right, to find love after being through narcissistic relationships and get healthy, secure relationships, right?
I've done it. It's possible.
Yeah, good. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you so much. And thank you for coming back on. And I am looking forward to talking with you more about other topics, and especially the one when you've been in the relationships with one where you've been, cheated on, and this very, using the sexual relationships as basically, like you called it, like it's a drug, it's a medication. Those are tough and powerful, and knowing how to, not
the trauma of betrayal is very painful.
Yeah, and that's again where my chest tightens right there. So I'm certain. And when in those relationships, it would probably, I would say it's some people that I've known that have had their narcissistic partners haven't had to deal with that. But I do know many people out there, including myself, where that has been one of the biggest traumas, because the betrayal also is the trigger of the abandonment. Being basically not chosen and left behind over and over and over again. And that was probably one of the most toxic and poisonous feelings that I had. So I get that.
The only thing I would add is that follow those body sensations that you've mentioned so poignantly. Follow those body sensations to recognize that it might be, again, that old story kind of creeping up through your nervous system, through your memory, and, embrace it. And commit to that part, as opposed to committing to the person you're worried about blocking over there, or the person who, is still trying to woo you and you don't want to turn them away. Commit here to self-advocacy and protection and healing of that part of yourself, and you'll bypass these tendencies to continue to be gravitating towards narcissistic individuals.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really great point, because the narcissistic person always has an answer for your objections. They always have a verbal response back to whatever it is that you're raising. Yeah. And but if it never makes this feel any better, and I know that's how I knew I was in a danger mode with another potentially, toxic relationship, was I kept coming back to the body. And for me, I can't remember if we discussed this in the episode or not, but I have rheumatoid arthritis, and my RA is triggered. And I discovered exactly what triggers my RA. And it was this type of an individual, whether it was in a professional setting or in a personal setting. So when I started to have a flare up, I just knew this is a poison to my system. And it doesn't matter what they say or how they're doing it. My body is telling me, right up, run, get out now, because of all the unconscious signals, that my body had put together to protect myself through life from these types of people that I never knew to honor and listen to.
That's brilliant.
So I don't recommend chronic illnesses for everyone, but our nervous system does talk to us, and I've learned that it really does. Our body is talking to us. So I think that's a great point. Well, you're amazing. And thank you so much for doing this again with me today. I appreciate knowing you and having you on the show.
Amazing too. And I am so happy to be with you again. Thank you, Ameé.
Thank you.